Okay, anyway, this one isn't a countdown because today's movies deal with violence, and I don't want to be a trashy rat who minimizes people's traumas. What these movies have in common is that they take an unconventional approach and they feel sort of fever dreamy. I chose to talk about them because I think it's easy for a lot of us to wallow in self-pity, and I honestly felt like the luckiest girl alive after watching these, so if you've been needing a kick in the ass to start appreciating life, you've come to the right place. The first movie I'll be talking about is Black Sun by Gary Tarn. This one's sort of like an essay film, and its subject is an artist. Oh my god, I don't want to say his name because I'm gonna butcher it. This person, an artist who was attacked in his own apartment and blinded by junkies attempting to rob him. What made this cruelly ironic is that he was attacked with paint thinner, presumably his own. The documentary is essentially a stream of his experiences, thoughts, and memories following the assault. I haven't seen anything like this. I found it interesting because we never see our narrator or the specific people he mentions. There are points when he discusses his experiences, and we're shown the streets of New York City as well as different countries he eventually traveled to on his own. In most of the footage of New York, the people seem unaware they're being filmed. In a strange way, it helped the movie feel more true to life. When you're blind, you're arguably very disconnected from the world, and if you're completely blind, you don't notice people looking at you, so the people ignoring the camera helped. I think the stream of consciousness approach was really cool. I'm not used to it. His attackers have never been caught, and he didn't recover his sight. But he's lived a very productive, rich life, and he hasn't let his creativity go to waste either. He's written several books and been married a few times. He mentions how being blind is tantamount to being castrated for a lot of men, and I can kind of understand. Most men are visual creatures. They like to look at things, and they're driven by certain urges in ways a lot of us women aren't. He didn't adopt this mentality, but the comparison to blind men feeling castrated shows just how isolating blindness can be. I like the score a lot. It reminded me of Boards of Canada. I wouldn't say this ends on a positive note. It ends on a somber one, which is why I'm talking about this today. I make these videos because I think it's necessary to look at life through a realistic lens. Being too fatalistic or optimistic is delusional, and even though this man has thrived, I wondered if his soft-spokenness always existed, or if it's reflective of a man who will live the rest of his life with his guard up. Either way, he's incredible, and watching this motivated me to be a little less complacent in certain areas of my own life. If the other movies I talk about seem too grim for you, at least watch this one. Remembering that there are people who are worse off than you, whether they're disabled, severely traumatized, or things like that, is sometimes enough to get you through one more day. Practicing gratitude has helped me a lot, and he even mentions its importance as well. He shared how he'd met a cab driver who told him that he'd lost his entire family in the Cambodian genocide, and that made him feel like his blindness paled in comparison. The next one is Devil's Freedom, or Libertad del Diablo by Everardo González. said it in Spanish because sometimes different languages induce ASMR for some people, so you're welcome if it worked. This one highlights the stories of anonymous people who faced or perpetrated violence in Mexico. This one made me cry, you guys. It also hit close to home because my dad comes from one of the most violent countries in Latin America, arguably more violent than Mexico, but he also lived in Mexico for a few years before coming to the US. While Black Sun was bittersweet, this just felt like a punch to the gut, throat, and nose at the same time. If any of you are familiar with the Silent Hill games, it gave off those vibes. It was just that dismal. If for some reason you're not aware, police corruption is rife in Latin America, and Mexico is notorious for having some of the world's most violent drug cartels. They're constantly bribing and or extorting the police and military. It's a mess. I'm not going to get into why this has gone on for so long. It's a thorny issue, so I've left some links below if you'd like to educate yourselves. Everyone in this wears this creepy flesh-colored mask, which is obviously for their safety, but one person removes it at the end and it made my heart drop. We're not given too much context, which again I assume is a safety measure, but I wasn't sure if exposing herself would put her in danger. The pain on her face made me want to give her the biggest hug, and it's the pain of someone who's a shell of a human, honestly. Someone whose vitality has been snatched and replaced with a burden that'll never go away. Everyone in this is haunted. Some of them will never know what happened to their family members, and that's an ineffable level of grief I don't like thinking about. When you don't know what happened to your loved ones or why, you simply can't function anymore. If you know they met a violent end, or you don't know if they're being tortured on a daily basis, how can the grief end? This level of heartache sends a lot of people to early graves. A missing woman's daughter mentioned how she fantasizes about torturing the people who've taken her mom, and it's hard to tell what age she is, but knowing that such a young girl is that anguished makes me want to dissociate from the human race. I'm almost embarrassed to be human at this point, you guys. There's not really a score to this, but the little you hear is harsh and metallic. You also hear wind chimes and whispers between scenes, which feels reminiscent of ghosts. That's also why it reminds me of Silent Hill. One man's story really messed me up, you guys. Seeing men or the elderly cry feels more acute to me, because children and women cry all the time, but men are taught to hold everything in, so I feel like their sadness can weigh a lot more. With elderly people, you know they're tired of life, and people treat them like they're disposable all the time. We're really failing our children and elders. I don't know where the world is headed. You probably gotta be more careful with this one if you are in a dark place, so be warned. I have a lump in my throat talking about this right now. The last movie is Caniba from 2017, directed by these guys. I'm not gonna bother with their names. This one was the most challenging for me to get through, simply because this one's slow, super slow. Caniba uses an uncomfortably intimate approach to reveal the ties that bind two brothers, Issei and Jun Sagawa. In 1981, Issei Sagawa murdered a colleague he'd been infatuated with, a young woman named Renee Hartfelt. After he'd shot her, he sexually violated her corpse, mutilated it, and attempted to eat her raw flesh. Over the course of a few days, he continued violating her body and eating it bit by bit. When her remains began decomposing, he tried to dump them in a lake but was caught by police. He only spent a couple of years in a mental institution because a French judge declared he was mentally insane. The documents from the case were sealed, so he couldn't be tried in Japan and essentially walked free. He also came from a wealthy family and money talks. This is very slow. It bears repeating. Some might even consider this pointless, so I don't recommend you watch this unless you've watched Interview with a Cannibal first. That's a 30-minute documentary by Vice. Keep in mind that it does present things in a reckless way. I think both should have been a lot more sympathetic toward the victim, but it's in the description below. You won't glean anything from just watching Caniba, which also makes this difficult to sit through. The subject matter alone is taxing. The sound design made me feel queasy a couple of times, and I really didn't enjoy how much focus there was on his fucking flesh and mouth. Listening to the squelching noises while he ate was too suggestive to gloss over, and that's another reason why I think this could have been presented more sensitively. I felt like I needed to take a shower and join a church when this was over, to be honest. The brother is a strange creature that probably shouldn't have lived with another creature like Issei. He was very nonchalant while describing his brother's proclivities, and I was not prepared for that level of disrespect to the victim. It made me want to punch him in the mouth, and hearing these two talk about how beautiful they thought Renee was sickening. You don't hear the directors ask any questions, you just hear these two ramble about things. In Issei's case, he rambles very languidly because he'd had a stroke years before and was under June's care during filming. You will see and hear this little goblin talk without saying anything at all, and then you'll see home videos of them as children, and then you'll see him lick his lips slowly while his brother asks him questions about his paraphilia. I had attempted to watch this almost a year ago, but my smooth brain couldn't handle it. I think the haziness of the lens pissed me off or something. The only good thing about this was the song during the end credits. Very pretty, but I found out that it was inspired by this murder. I mean, it was on Wikipedia, so that could be a lie. This is the second time I hear a song about a fucking necrophile, not knowing that's what it's about, and I end up liking it, which is very awkward for me, but I like to listen to these songs and pretend they're about something else, so please don't come for me. I can't say this movie was well done. Again, kind of disrespectful, but what do I know? Issei Sagawa became a D-list celebrity of sorts when he returned to Japan. He starred in several Pinku movies. In one such film, he reenacts the murder and rape of Renee. I briefly touched on Pinku movies in my last video. They're essentially artsy pornos, and a subgenre of these films that is popular centers on taboo and violent sexual themes. Like I said, a twisted fascination with this case allowed this deviant to relive his crimes, and that should have sent his little goblin ass to a torture chamber in a radical Islamic country or something. But that's just my humble opinion. For my entire adult life, I've struggled to understand Japanese society's attitudes regarding sexuality, especially sexual aberrations, but I'm not gonna go there, at least not today. Issei Sagawa is dead now. I'd say rest in piss, but he'd enjoy that, so good riddance. Some of you might not understand why I would suggest a documentary I find exploitative, and it's because I want to give a warning. I want to warn you against certain kinds of open-mindedness. You cannot look at everyone with nuance, you just can't. That's a huge mistake. Most people, it's fine. Don't make room for that when it comes to sociopathy and sexual deviance, and I'm speaking from personal experience. I want you to think about all your urges and weaknesses. Think about how hard it is to break habits, big or small, and then come and tell me that we need to give second chances to people who violate the rights of others. Try to make the argument that rehabilitation works against violent sexual offenders, and I'll go ahead and explain why it's impossible. You just can't. You need to think about biology and the desires that impel the male sex. I appreciate it if you've made it this far. Please consider giving my video a like, because the algorithm does not appreciate my efforts. Stay tuned for the next one.